When studying rhetoric, it is also interesting to look at how a text affects an audience, in addition to what the situation is that controls how the meaning that is communicated. Okay. From Aristotle, we get these three persuasive appeals. He said that a rhetorical text, could appeal to the audience in an ethical way. He said it could appeal to the audience in an emotional way, and he said that the text could appeal to the audience in a logical or rational way. When we say ethos, what we really are talking about is the character of the speaker. So someone like Oprah Winfrey, who has this very compelling American dream story, building her own empire. Her character is very compelling. Her just who she is. This is why when you go to the grocery store and you see the Oprah's Book Club stickers on a novel, this is why those stickers are there. Because when we see Oprah, just her name, we respond to that ethos. So another way to say this is that when we say ethos, what we are talking about is the credibility of the speaker, and that is what we are responding to as an audience. But also we mean their personality, and it's important not to dismiss personality as a part of ethos. What's interesting and what's tricky about ethos is when we look for it, we often have to consider the context and then the text as a whole. Okay, so let's look at a couple examples just to sort of get a sense of what we mean by implied ethos. If we look at an image like this of Mr. Rogers, even if you don't know who this person is, you would look at the way he is dressed, the way he is smiling, the color in his hair, and it's not hard to see a grandfatherly figure. There's softness in this person's just presentation of self. So if we were to identify this person's ethos, it would be very hard to just point to one aspect of this image. We would have to consider the whole to say that this ethos is warm, grandfatherly, etc. It's also important to know, as I said, the personality of a speaker or the presentation of self. Even if we know, say, of Hillary Clinton, she's the former Secretary of State, may run for president in the future. So she has an immediate authority about her name, but the way she presents herself can also affect her ethos. The difference between these two images, on the one hand, on the left we have an ethos that feels a bit wild, a leader that we look to and respond to in a very specific way, as opposed to on the right hand side you have a leader who is collected, who is thoughtful, who is making a point. Okay, same person, same authority, same expertise and credibility, but the presentation of the self can affect the ethos we are responding to. We can also find ethos in texts that don't immediately point to an author or a speaker. When we see the Nike swoosh symbol or read the word Nike, immediately we all think of a very specific culture or group. We think of athletes. The image of the Greek statue, the muscles and the posturing comes to mind. And this is purposeful. Nike has designed for itself an ethos of athleticism, of strength, of perseverance, and that emanates from this symbol, probably because of the advertisements we've seen and our experience with this brand. But you can't respond to the Nike brand without responding also to this ethos, this culture. This is similar of other brands like MTV. MTV has a very specific culture attached to it. One of youth, one of free thinking and individuality, and we could go on forever problematizing that. But so this is the last thing to know about ethos, is that with an ethos comes a set of values, a set of codes. If you respond to that ethos, it's probably because you feel a part of that community. Okay. If you're responding to this slide initially with the awe, That is appropriate response, and it is a good way to understand the appeal of pathos. Pathos is the appeal that aims for your audience's heart. Okay, seeks to persuade and argue its point purely through an emotional vein rather than through an intellect or otherwise. Okay, if you just flick on tonight's TV show and pay attention to the commercials with this in mind, almost everything you encounter in advertisement is emotional. Okay, but what's interesting and can be tricky about an analysis of pathos is seeing kind of the relationship between a pathos and an ethos. Movie speeches, towards the end when the one guy or a woman gets up there to rally the troops, these almost always rely on pathos. But what they are doing is trying to stir up a sense of duty, a sense of patriotism, a set of values. So pathos and ethos often work well together, and what can make for an interesting analysis is you identifying and showing how these work together. The last appeal is logos. This is the appeal that tries to get the reader thinking, but appeals to a reader's sense of rationality. Logos is generated by evidence and reasons, and we oftentimes, in analysis, we say, well, the logos of the text is created by the statistics. Well, statistics are part of an argument, but statistics alone do not usually convince us. It's what the author does with those statistics, how they are explained, how they are reasoned, that generates the logos of a text. So it's important to keep that in mind, that both work together. Aristotle called logos the most rigorous appeal and identified two methods for reasoning. The first is induction, and this is moving from small details to general claims. The second is deduction, which is moving from larger arguments to smaller premises and the evidence that supports them or disproves them. We'll look at both carefully. Inductive reasoning, you can think of this as the looser of the two forms of logic. This, as I said, moves from small observations to larger generalities, so from details to claims. Something like the famous syllogism, men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore, because Socrates is a man, he must also be mortal. The thing to take note about induction is that you often have to leap from one observation to the next, and it's in this leap that you can create problems. So if you start with an observation like this, nothing is greater than God, and move on to a sort of adjacent observation, a peanut butter sandwich is better than nothing, you can derive a relationship between these two observations with the word nothing and come up with, therefore, because a peanut butter sandwich is better than nothing and nothing is greater than God, a peanut butter sandwich must be greater than God. Okay? Proof by induction, it depends on the validity of the reasoning, and if that seems suspicious to you, that's where you go after it. Deduction, on the other hand, is a bit more rigorous. This is the kind of argument you study and you create in the essays in most of your classes. And the reason this is more rigorous is because you will come up with a claim supported by evidence, but you spend a bulk of your discussion either in the paragraph, testing the relationship between that evidence and the claim you make. And you do this for small points. So every single part of the discussion is well vetted and proven. And then you take this collective set of points as a test for the overall thesis statement. Okay? This is why science is addicted to deductive logic and to logic overall. In order to land something on say, Mars, you have to rigorously test every premise, every hypothesis. The last thing to know about logos is that pure logic commits to persuading without emotion and without conflated considerations of ethos. We always encounter these two sort of distractions, especially in arguments with each other, and especially when we, argue with our parents. The logical proof, do this because I said so, usually is communicated through emotion, anger. And that's how it's persuasive. And it's also pointing to the parent's authority, because I said so, not because I logically tested and proved this to you, but because I'm the authority and you have to listen. Anytime you conflate these appeals in this way, logos and pathos, logos and ethos, you will generate a fallacy. If you are analyzing logic, this is the best way to dismantle your opponent's argument. Find logical fallacies and show why they are a critical flaw in the discussion. As you read, what you should be looking for is, first of all, how the text is designed to move you or the reader in terms of emotions, how this text is designed to inspire an action, so stir up an ethos, and how the text is designed to convince the reader logically of the mind of some kind of truth. Ultimately, your goal is also to take these as examples and models of rhetoric so that you yourself can design these appeals into your own writing.